this podcast, we will be exploring the themes, characters, and impacts of stories that center and celebrate underrepresented people. But before we start with that, hi, my name's Exquisite. I'm a 21-year-old English and Communication Studies major at Louisiana State University. Thank you for joining me. The first novel we will be dissecting is called Legendborn by Tracy Deon. On this episode of Our Moment, we will mainly be talking a little bit about the author's background, why I chose this novel, and we'll also be discussing the prologue as well as a content warning for what you will find in this novel itself. Here's a little blurb I found about Tracy Deon from her website. Tracy Deon is the New York Times best-selling and Coretta Scott King John Steptoe Award-winning author of Legendborn and a second-generation fangirl. She grew up in central North Carolina where she devoured fantasy books and Southern food in equal measure. After earning her bachelor's and master's degree in communication and performance studies from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, Tracy worked in live theater, video game production, and K-12 education. When she is not writing, Tracy speaks on panels at science fiction and fantasy conventions, reads fanfic, arranges puppy playdates, and keeps an eye out for ginger-flavored everything. Tracy is a champion for diversity and representation in science fiction and fantasy literature and media. Now, Tracy sounds like an excellent person, and she's just like me. I mean, she has the same major that at least one of my majors is similar to hers. But I first found out by Legendborn, believe it or not, from a blog post where someone only posted the cover photo. And I know that technically you aren't really supposed to judge a book by its cover, but guys, this cover was it was immaculate. I wish I could show you, but because this is a podcast, I can only really describe it. So the cover is this drawing of a black girl, and her hair is all spread out behind her, and she's got her hands held up in the way as if she were to cast a spell. Her eyes are also looking directly into the camera, if it was a picture. And on one of her arms is raised up is this red aura, and on the other arm is a blue aura. And all I can say is that you just have to take my word for it, / just look up a picture of the book. I really wish I could just post it on the screen, but I hope I'm communicating to you just how gorgeous this cover is. So just from looking at this cover, I decided to read the book, but then I actually looked up what it was about, and it's a modern fantasy about this girl named Bree. So I'm going to read to you kind of a little bit of an excerpt about it. 16-year-old Bree Matthews wants nothing more to do with her family memories or childhood home after her mother dies in an accident. A residential program for bright high schoolers at UNC Chapel Hill seems like the perfect escape until Bree witnesses a magical attack on her very first night on campus. Basically, this story is almost a modern Arthurian retelling. It's less of a retelling, it's more like just embracing Arthurian legends through Bree Matthews. It's also important to note that another reason I chose this book is because of my idea of the new literary canon. And when I say my idea, what I mean is I had this one teacher, shout out to Dr. Barrett, who introduced this idea of the new literary canon. The new literary canon is this idea that the current giants in literature that we typically read and are assigned in class tend to focus on white male authors, right? So the new literary canon seeks to find authors that are typically not represented and show them for the powerhouses they are and explore that. And that's also what this podcast seeks to explore. So later on, when we look at other books, they will also typically be centering non-white authors of color in a general sense. So a bit of a warning as we move ahead and for Legendborn in general. So a bit of a content warning. This book contains themes surrounding death of a parent and traumatic grief, flashbacks, alcohol consumption, mind control, memory manipulation, racist macro and microaggressions, emesis, which is vomiting, blood, mild gore, combat violence, mentions of physical abuse, racist violence, and sexual violence. While I do not intend to read much from the book except to illustrate any points that I want to say about the characters or why a part of the book was so certain, this is just, if you're reading along with me or tapping into this book club, I just want you to be warned just a little bit in advance. I also really want to make sure that we're all coming from the same page here. It's very important to know that Bree is one of the only black girls in her class as well as in the club that she joins in the book. This is very important because it deals with one of the themes of the book. Another thing, and on a different episode, we are actually going to get into a lot of the themes, but since it's the first episode, we're just not going to go there just yet. But another thing I want us to kind of focus on is that this novel also deals a lot with grief. So if you aren't prepared for that, or if you don't think you can handle that, maybe you shouldn't read it. You can still listen along. I will always do a spoiler warning if I'm ever going to get in too deep. So basically, here's your spoiler warning. And in future episodes, I'll also try to, keep a spoiler warning going. Just so we're all safe and we're all taken care of and we're all covered on that end. But I felt that to start this, and I hope you can hear me turning the pages of the book, because I would really, really like to read the prologue today and then wrap up our episode. But I just think the prologue is one of the most important things you can read in the book. Excuse my stutter. I'm very sorry. It's the very beginning of the book, and that's when you are immediately introduced to your character. And I just think a well-written prologue can make or break the way that an audience is going to receive a novel. And I think Deon does a very good job of writing her prologue, so we receive it really well. Prologue. The police officer's body goes blurry, then sharpens again. I don't stare at him directly. I can't really focus on one thing in this room, but when I do look, his face shimmers. His badge, the rectangular nameplate, his tie clip, all the little metal details on his chest ripple and shine like loose silver change at the bottom of a fountain. Nothing about him appears solid. Nothing about him feels real. I don't think about that though. I can't. Besides, everything looks otherworldly when you've been crying for 3 hours straight. The police officer and nurse brought me and my father into a tiny mint green room. Now they sit on the other side of the table. They say they are explaining the situation to us. Those people don't feel real, but neither does the situation they keep explaining. I don't cry for my mother's death, or for myself. I cry because these strangers in the hospital, the nurse, the doctor, the police officer, don't know my mother, and yet they were closest to her when she died. And when your people die, you have to listen to strangers speak your nightmare into existence. We found her on Route 70 around 8, the police officer says. The air conditioner kicks on. The sharp scent of hospital-grade hand soap and floor cleaner blow across our face. I listen to these people. I don't know use the past tense about my mother, the person who brought me into this world and created my present. They are past tensing my heart, my whole beating, bleeding, torn heart, right in front of me. It is a violation. These uniformed strangers carve me open with their words, but they are just doing their jobs. I can't scream at people who are just doing their jobs, can I? I want to. My father sits in a vinyl padded chair. It creaks when he leans forward to read paragraphs of fine print on pieces of paper. Where did this paperwork come from? Who has paperwork on hand for my mother's death? Why are they ready when I am not ready? My father asks questions, signs his names, blinks, breathes, nods. I wonder how he is functioning. My mother's life has stopped. Shouldn't everything and everyone stop living too? She was crushed inside our family sedan, body half crumpled under the dashboard after a hit and run. She was alone until someone nice, probably frightened Good Samaritan, saw her overturned car on the side of the road. Blood red twine connects the final words I said to my mother last night in anger to another night in February. A night with my best friend Alice and I, sitting together in the basement of our parents' split-level home, decided UNC Chapel Hill's early college program was our dream. Bright high school students can earn college credit at Carolina over the course of 2 years, experience life in dorms, and become independent. At least, that's what the brochure said. For Alice and me, early college was 2 minority girls' tickets out of a small town in rural North Carolina. For us, early college meant bigger ideas, classrooms, and adventure. We filled out our applications together, marched right into the Bentonville post office after school together, dropped the envelopes in the chute together. If we could get into EC, we could leave Bentonville High and move to a university dorm 4 hours away from home, and away from parents who held us so tight that sometimes we couldn't breathe. A decade before I was born, my mother was an undergraduate student at Carolina, a burgeoning scientist. I heard the stories for years, seen the framed photos of elaborate chemistry experiments, beakers and glass pipettes, protective goggles resting upon her high cheekbones. It was her fault, really, for planting the idea in my mind. That's what I told myself anyway. Our letters came yesterday. Alice's parents knew she was applying. They beamed like they were the ones who had been accepted. I knew it wouldn't go that way for me. I applied behind my mother's back, certain that once I got in, once I had that letter, she let go of her need to keep me so close. I handed her the letter on blue and white Carolina stationery, grinned like it was a trophy. I'd never seen her so angry. My brain doesn't accept where my body is sitting. It catalogs the last 36 hours in an attempt to find the how of this hospital room. Last night she roared about trust and safety and not rushing to grow up. I screamed about unfairness, about what I'd earned, and how I needed to get away from dirt roads. This morning, I was still fuming when I woke up. In bed, I made a silent declaration to not speak to her all day. The declaration had felt good. Today, a nothing normal Tuesday except that, for me, it carried the stubborn undercurrent of we'll talk later. Tonight, she drove away from work at the end of the day. Then, a car. Now, this pale green room and a disinfectant smell that burns when I inhale. Forever. We'll talk later is not the same as we'll never talk again. The twine from February closes around me like I will never take another breath, but somehow the police officer is still talking, shimmering and shining. The air around him looks alive, like he is drenched in magic. But when your entire world is shattering, a little bit of magic is nothing. That's going to do it for today's episode of Our Moment. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you for listening. Thank you for joining me on this little experiment where I talk into a microphone and hopefully make you laugh or get you excited about a book and maybe even purchase this book from Miss Tracy Deon, who is a magician with words. I feel like I could have used a better pun there, but this is all new to me, and I'm really excited that you're joining me on this journey, like I just said. In the next episode, we're going to talk a little bit about the first part. We're going to dive into some themes and maybe break down a little bit about Bree Matthews, our main character. We're also going to talk about just maybe what it's like being at a PWI. I myself, as I said earlier, I attend Louisiana State University, and a lot of times I'm one of the only Black students in my class, and maybe I will share a little bit of how that has affected me and how that kind of colors the way that I read this book. We're also going to discuss things of grief, so while you're at home and waiting for this next episode, hopefully, or while you are reading, why don't you think about what does grief mean to you? How have you ever grieved something before? How in this past year has grief affected you as we've lost so many things that are not just people, that are experiences, that are maybe friendships? And just stay magical. And I'm so happy you will continue to listen to Our Moment. Thank you so much.